When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood before Congress, calling Ben Shapiro a fascist propagandist for Trump's authoritarianism, she was sure she had won. She had humiliated the conservative commentator on camera, shown him who held the real power, and landed a blow she knew would go viral on every progressive platform. What she didn't expect was for him to simply smile and take notes. The events that followed would become a masterclass in how calm logic can completely dismantle emotional manipulation. For the next 37 minutes, Shapiro systematically took apart AOC's entire career without ever raising his voice, without resorting to personal attacks, using nothing but facts, evidence, and her own words against her. By the time he was done, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was left with little more than her Twitter account and a career in shambles. There was a different feeling in the House Oversight Committee hearing room on October 28, 2025. Officially, the topic on the table was social media misinformation and the accountability of Congress. But everyone in that room knew it was really all about political theater. The public gallery was packed far beyond its capacity. It was predictably split right down ideological lines. Young progressive activists in their Bernie Sanders shirts and squad merchandise filled the left side, their phones already up and positioned for the best recording angles. Meanwhile, conservative media figures and political commentators took over the right side with notebooks out and their own recording devices at the ready. The committee chairman, James Comer of Kentucky, scanned the room with the weary expression of a man who knew this hearing would create more drama than actual results. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had been invited to speak about right-wing misinformation and the danger it posed to democracy, a topic she felt she was an expert on, given how she'd been a target of conservative media since her very first campaign. But what made this hearing so different? What put that electric tension in the air was the fact that Ben Shapiro was there. The well-known conservative commentator, podcast host, and lightning-fast debater was sitting quietly in the third row of the gallery, dressed in a dark suit and his yarmulke, with a yellow legal pad on his knee and a pen in his hand. At just 39 years old, Shapiro had already built a media empire on a foundation of what he called facts and logic, an approach that turned him into a hero for conservatives and a villain for progressives, who saw him as the embodiment of everything wrong with modern right-wing talk. AOC had actually requested that he be banned from attending the hearing. Chairman Comer had flatly denied her request. What she didn't realize, and what was about to make the next hour so much worse for her, was that Shapiro wasn't just there to watch. He had actually been invited to testify as an expert witness on media and commentary. She was, in fact, about to walk straight into a trap she had set for herself. The hearing kicked off just like any other. Chairman Comer gavelled the proceedings to order, introduced the day's topic, and then invited Representative Ocasio-Cortez to give her opening testimony. She stood up with the polished confidence of someone who had truly mastered political performance, adjusted the microphone, and aimed a smile right at the cameras scattered around the room. "Thank you, Chairman Comer," she began, her voice hitting that perfect mix of wounded dignity and defiant strength she had perfected over years in the public eye. "I'm here today to talk about the very real dangers that right-wing misinformation poses to our media ecosystem. From Fox News and conservative podcasts all the way to social media influencers, we are seeing a coordinated effort to spread disinformation, attack progressive voices, and undermine our very democracy." On the progressive side of the gallery, people nodded along, with some already busy typing out tweets to celebrate their champion's courage. Shapiro, on the other hand, just jotted something down on his legal pad, his expression completely neutral, giving away no reaction at all, whatsoever. AOC moved on with her prepared remarks, hitting all the usual talking points on media bias, corporate influence, and the need for accountability. It was a perfectly fine and professional testimony, the kind that would probably get her some friendly headlines and a few viral clips for her social media. But then she saw Shapiro, still taking notes, with that faint smile playing on his lips, and something inside her just snapped. The opportunity felt too perfect for her to resist. Here was one of her biggest critics, sitting right there, completely unable to talk back in a room where she controlled the microphone and the stage. The temptation to go off script was simply too much to handle. "And speaking of misinformation," she said, her voice suddenly shifting and taking on an edge that made several committee members snap their heads up in attention. "We have Ben Shapiro in the room today." She pointed a finger right at him, and every single camera in the room immediately swung around to catch his reaction. He just looked up from his notepad, met her eyes, gave a single polite nod, and then went right back to writing. His complete lack of any visible reaction only seemed to make her even more furious. "Mr. Shapiro," she declared, "embodies everything dangerous about modern conservatism." Her voice rose, brimming with righteous anger, as she continued. "He uses his platform to spread hate, attacking women, people of color, Muslims, and anyone who doesn't fit into his narrow worldview. He enables fascism, all while pretending to use facts and logic. He makes bigotry sound intellectual." Shapiro kept taking notes, his pen steadily gliding across the legal pad. He didn't look up, didn't react, just kept writing, a slight smile never quite leaving his face. AOC's voice grew louder, more impassioned. "He's been a propagandist for Donald Trump," she charged, defending a man who incited insurrection, who attacks democracy daily, and who represents everything un-American. And Mr. Shapiro provides him with intellectual cover. He makes authoritarianism seem reasonable. He makes cruelty sound logical. She was now fully committed. The prepared remarks forgotten, her camera-ready performance transformed into genuine aggression. "You hide, Mr. Shapiro, behind your Ivy League education and your fast-talking debate tactics. But what you really do is simply provide cover for bigotry. You make racism sound intellectual. You make sexism sound like logic. You dress up hatred in a suit and call it commentary." The progressive gallery was on its feet, applauding and cheering. This was exactly what they'd come for. Their champion was calling out one of the conservative media's biggest names, speaking truth to power, and showing courage in the face of right-wing propaganda. Then AOC went even further, crossing a line she'd later desperately wish she could take back. And as a Jewish man, she pressed, "You should know better. You should understand persecution. You should recognize fascism when you see it. Yet, you enable it, defend it, and profit from it. You've chosen to align yourself with forces that history will judge harshly." She pointed at him again, her finger jabbing the air for emphasis. "You are not a journalist, Mr. Shapiro. You are not even a commentator. You are a propagandist for fascism. You are dangerous to democracy. And you are here today because Republicans want to give a platform to your hatred." She sat down to a standing ovation from the progressive side of the gallery. Phones captured every angle of her triumph, already uploading clips with captions like "AOC destroys Ben Shapiro" and "Watch AOC call out right-wing propaganda." Squad members in attendance beamed with pride. She had done it. She had humiliated one of their biggest critics in front of Congress and the nation. AOC looked toward Shapiro, expecting to see him red-faced, angry, flustered, and defensive. Instead, She found him still writing on his legal pad, completely unmoved by her attack. He finished whatever note he was making, capped his pen with deliberate precision, then looked up. Their eyes met across the hearing room, and Ben Shapiro smiled. Not a smirk, not a sneer, just a small, knowing smile. Then he carefully placed his pen on top of his legal pad and folded his hands. It was a picture of calm composure. He looked like someone who had just been handed an unexpected gift and was already planning exactly how to use it. Chairman Comer cleared his throat, and, for the first time since AOC had started her attack, he spoke. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he said, "that was quite unexpected." He paused, consulted his notes, then delivered the line that made AOC's confident expression crack for the very first time. "Mr. Shapiro," he announced, "is actually scheduled to testify today as an expert witness on media commentary and political discourse." The color drained from AOC's face. She hadn't known. She had attacked him, believing he was merely an audience member, unable to respond, and forced to just sit there and take it. But he was about to get his own microphone, his own time, his own opportunity to respond, especially judging by the way he stood up, gathered his legal pad, and walked calmly toward the witness table. Ben Shapiro had clearly been planning this response for quite some time. Ben Shapiro approached the witness table with unhurried, precise movements. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, the physical manifestation of someone who had built a career on staying calm while everyone else lost their composure. He carried a manila folder in addition to his legal pad, and as he sat down and adjusted the microphone, the folder's label became visible to the cameras. It read, "Alexandria's Record." AOC sat frozen in her seat, still officially a witness, unable to leave, forced to watch, as the man she had just spent 5 minutes attacking prepared to respond. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. The progressive gallery, which had been so jubilant just moments before, now sat in uncertain silence, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong with their champion's performance. When Shapiro finally spoke, his voice carried none of AOC's emotional fury. Instead, it had the rapid-fire precision he was famous for. His words came out so fast they almost seemed to blur, but you could still somehow hear every single syllable. Perfectly clear. It was like listening to a machine gun, and it hit just as hard. "Thank you, Chairman Comer." He started by looking not at AOC, but over at the rest of the committee. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he said, "just spent the last few minutes personally attacking me. She's called me a fascist, a propagandist, and someone who enables bigotry. She even questioned my integrity, my character, and my connection to my Jewish faith." He laid out these facts in a flat, non-defensive tone, just like a lawyer reading charges from a document. "Now, she's entitled to her own opinion of me." He took a small pause, adjusted his glasses, and then he delivered his first real blow. But since Representative Ocasio-Cortez decided to make this personal, turning a hearing on media accountability into an attack on my character, I think it's only fair we take a look at her record, because unlike opinions, facts are not up for debate. Shapiro put his hand down on the manila folder, and that little smirk came back. "And facts, as I often say, don't care about your feelings." The conservative side of the room let out an appreciative laugh at his signature line. Meanwhile, the progressive side just shifted uncomfortably in their seats. AOC just stared at that folder, trying to guess what was inside, what he had on her, and what was about to happen. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez attacks me for being what she likes to call a Trump propagandist," Shapiro kept going, his pace picking up speed. She claims that I'm an enabler of authoritarianism. She suggests that I'm a danger to democracy. These are some very serious charges. So, let's take a look at who the real danger is here. Let's look at her actual track record. Not the stuff she says on Twitter, not her activism on Instagram, but the real impact she's had on actual people. He then held up 3 fingers. I'm about to present 3 different categories of evidence. First, financial corruption. Second, economic devastation. And third, constituent abandonment. He lowered 1 finger for each category he named. This wasn't about opinions, feelings, or rhetoric. It was about facts, documents, her own words, and testimony from people whose lives she destroyed through her narcissism and neglect. With the framework now laid out, Shapiro leaned forward just a bit, his voice taking on a sharp edge of controlled intensity. Representative Ocasio-Cortez attacked my character. She questioned my integrity and suggested that I profit from hatred. So let's talk about who's really profiting here and from what. He opened the manila folder with careful precision, revealing what looked like dozens and dozens of pages of documents. When I'm finished here, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, he said, finally looking directly at her for the first time since he started speaking. You are going to wish you had just stuck to your prepared notes about right-wing misinformation instead of deciding to make this personal. His eyes went right back down to the documents. Let's begin. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was sitting at that witness table with absolutely nowhere to run and no way to stop what was about to happen, suddenly understood with a terrible clarity that she had made a catastrophic mistake. She had poked the bear, and now that bear was about to maul her with facts. Shapiro pulled the first document out of his folder with the sharp precision of a surgeon selecting just the right instrument. Riley Roberts, he began, and you could see AOC physically flinch at the name. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's longtime boyfriend, who is now her husband. Let's talk about how she has made him rich by using campaign funds that were donated by people who thought they were supporting democratic socialism. He laid out several pages of documents on the table with the FEC filing records in plain sight. Since 2018, Representative Ocasio-Cortez's campaign has paid Mr. Roberts' LLC more than $6 million. $6 million. He let that number just hang in the air for a moment, letting it expand and fill the entire room. Listed uniformly as marketing consulting services, Shapiro's delivery then sped up, shifting into his signature rapid-fire mode. So, let's take a closer look at what Mr. Roberts actually did to justify $6 million in payments. I had my own research team conduct a full and comprehensive search. We looked for any websites he might have built, any campaign materials he designed, any digital strategies he put in place, any social media campaigns he created. Absolutely any kind of deliverable product that would justify even a fraction of that $6 million. He then looked up from his documents, staring directly at AOC. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, can you name even one website that Riley Roberts built for your campaign? She opened her mouth as if to answer, but Shapiro didn't give her the chance. How about one single campaign advertisement that he created? She tried to speak again. Can you name one strategic document he ever produced? Her mouth simply closed. One single piece of work product that justifies $6 million in campaign funds. The silence in the room stretched on. AOC's face turned bright red. Shapiro waited for exactly 5 seconds, just long enough for that silence to become truly damning. It wasn't quite long enough for her to come up with an answer before he continued. We found nothing. 0 websites, 0 advertisements, and 0 deliverables. $6 million for undefined consulting that produced no tangible results, no measurable outcomes, and no work product of any kind. His voice was sharp, with prosecutorial precision. That's not consulting, Representative. That's a no-show job. That's putting your boyfriend on the campaign payroll and just calling it marketing services to make it sound legitimate. Shapiro then pulled out another document. Now, let's discuss how Representative Ocasio-Cortez's personal finances have evolved during her time in Congress. When she first entered Congress in January 2019, her financial disclosure showed a net worth of approximately $7,000. Not a lot, certainly, which was consistent with her story about being a working-class bartender struggling to make ends meet. He placed the document down, then pulled out another one. Today, her reported net worth exceeds $2 million. $2 million in 6 years, on a congressional salary of $174,000 per year. The math was simple enough that even the progressives in the gallery could do it. The numbers just didn't add up from salary alone. Book deals worth 7 figures, Shapiro continued, ticking off items on his fingers with machine gun speed. A Netflix documentary. The exact payment is undisclosed, but it's estimated at $500,000 or more. Podcast sponsorships. Speaking fees ranging up to $50,000 per appearance, all while calling herself a socialist fighting capitalism. She's made millions, from being Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the brand, the celebrity, the progressive icon. He leaned back, gesturing to highlight the contradiction. Let me be crystal clear about this hypocrisy. Representative Ocasio-Cortez lives in a luxury apartment in Navy Yard that costs over $3,000 per month. It has a 24-hour concierge, a rooftop pool, a wine bar. She drives a Tesla Model 3, $35,000 minimum. She wears designer clothes to every single public event. She attended the Met Gala, where a ticket costs $35,000, in a custom gown with "Tax the Rich" emblazoned on it, while surrounded by millionaires and billionaires. His delivery never slowed, never lost its precision. She calls herself a socialist, but she lives like a capitalist. She attacks the wealthy while becoming wealthy from attacking them. She preaches about economic inequality while accumulating personal wealth that puts her in the top 5% of American earners. That's not socialism, Representative Ocasio-Cortez. That's a grift. That's using progressive rhetoric to build a personal brand that enriches you, while the people who believed in you get nothing. A movement in the gallery caught everyone's attention. A young woman in her early 20s stood up slowly, wearing a faded red campaign shirt from AOC's first congressional run. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice, when she spoke, carried the clarity of someone who had been waiting a long time to say this. "May I speak?" she asked, looking at Chairman Comer. Shapiro immediately gestured his support. "Please?" The young woman stepped forward, and the cameras captured the logo on her old shirt. Ocasio 2018, a movement for all. She looked down at that shirt, then up at AOC, and something in her expression suggested that the shirt meant something very different now than it had when she'd first put it on. "My name is Jennifer Martinez," she said, her voice shaking with an emotion she was barely holding in check. "I volunteered for Representative Ocasio-Cortez's first campaign in 2018. That was when I believed she was different, when I thought she actually cared about working people, when I trusted that she meant what she said about fighting corruption and serving constituents instead of enriching herself." She pulled the shirt away from her body slightly, looking at it with something approaching disgust. "I worked 60 hours a week for her campaign. 60 hours, completely unpaid. Not underpaid, completely unpaid. I did phone banking until my voice was gone. I knocked on doors in the summer heat until my feet bled. I entered data until my eyes couldn't focus. I did this while working 3 part-time jobs to pay my rent and student loans because the campaign told us there was no money to pay volunteers. Her voice grew stronger, powered by an anger that had been building for years. They said we were building something bigger than money, that we were part of a revolution, that we were fighting the corrupt system that enriched politicians at the expense of regular people. I believed that, and I sacrificed my health, my finances, my time, all because I believed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was different. Jennifer looked directly at AOC now, and her eyes held nothing but betrayal. Then I found out about Riley. I found out that while I was working for free, while hundreds of us were volunteering 60-hour weeks with no compensation, your boyfriend was getting millions of dollars in campaign funds for work that apparently no one can identify or document. You used us. We thought we were building something real, something with meaning, but it turns out you were just running the same old political scam. The only difference was you had better Instagram captions. In one furious motion, she yanked the campaign shirt over her head, leaving her in just a tank top, and hurled it toward AOC's table. It landed in a crumpled, bright red heap on the polished wood, like an accusation, a wound, the very death of hope. Jennifer's voice broke as she said, "I want nothing to do with you. Nothing. You've become everything you claimed you were fighting against. You're just better at marketing it." As she sat down, several others in the progressive section of the gallery started quietly gathering their things to leave. They weren't making a scene, just silently walking out, unable to square what they just heard with the person they thought they believed in. Shapiro let the weight of Jennifer's testimony hang in the air, allowing the moment to breathe before he spoke again. Jennifer Martinez represents thousands of young people who put their faith in you. Representative Ocasio-Cortez. They worked for free while your boyfriend cashed in millions. They sacrificed for a cause while you built a brand. They thought they were fighting corruption while you were the one practicing it. He then pulled another document from his folder. But we're not finished with your finances, because this isn't just about how much money you've made. It's about the stunning hypocrisy of making millions off socialism while you practice capitalism, of attacking the rich while you become rich, of preaching equality while you live a life of luxury. Shapiro's voice held a tone of almost disbelief at the sheer audacity of it all. You got a $400,000 advance for writing a book about the Green New Deal, a piece of legislation that has achieved exactly nothing in actual policy. You made a Netflix documentary about your first year in Congress and reportedly pocketed over $500,000. You go on speaking tours charging $50,000 a pop to tell college kids about the evils of capitalism, all while taking their tuition money. He stacked the financial documents neatly, creating a physical pile of the mounting evidence. You attack me, Representative, for profiting from conservative media. I built an audience by creating content. I provide commentary that people choose to listen to. You, on the other hand, put your boyfriend on the campaign payroll for work that was never defined. You used your government position to get rich while preaching against personal enrichment. So between the two of us, who's the real corrupt one? The question, rhetorical yet devastating, just hung in the air. AOC couldn't answer, couldn't defend herself. She could only sit there as her financial hypocrisy was exposed for the world to see. And Shapiro, glancing at his notes, prepared to unleash his next line of attack. The financial corruption was bad enough, but the economic damage she caused was about to look even worse. Shapiro flipped to a new section in his folder, and his tone shifted. It was no longer just about personal corruption. Now, it was about policy failure and the human cost. Let's move on from how Representative Ocasio-Cortez makes herself rich to how she makes others poor. Specifically, let's talk about Amazon HQ2 and the 25,000 jobs she killed for a few likes on Twitter. He pulled out printed copies of her tweets, AOC's own words, captured forever on the internet. Back in February 2019, Amazon announced it was canceling its plans to build a second headquarters in Queens, New York. That was 25,000 jobs, an average salary of $150,000, billions in economic investment. It was the single largest economic development opportunity in New York City's recent history. Shapiro held up the tweets, reading them aloud in a voice that perfectly captured AOC's cadence, not quite as a cruel mockery, but with just enough inflection to show how absurd it was. Anything is possible. Today was the day a group of dedicated, everyday New Yorkers and their neighbors defeated Amazon's corporate greed. That's what you tweeted, Representative. You celebrated. You called it a victory. You said you defeated corporate greed. His voice then snapped back to its usual rapid-fire pace. Let's talk about what you actually defeated. 25,000 union jobs. Good-paying, working-class jobs that came with benefits and retirement plans. Construction jobs during the building phase. Service jobs for the operational phase. Countless small business opportunities for the restaurants and shops that would have served Amazon employees. Tax revenue that would have funded schools and infrastructure. An economic investment that would have completely transformed Queens. Shapiro placed the tweets down on the pile of evidence, building his case piece by piece. And you killed all of it. Not because of some careful economic analysis, not out of legitimate concern for the community's impact, but simply because it felt good. Because standing against Amazon made you appear revolutionary. And because attacking a huge corporation resonated with your supporters and grabbed media headlines. He then pulled out news articles that documented the aftermath. After Amazon pulled out of your district, unemployment shot up. Business investment dried up. The young professionals who might have moved into the area ended up going somewhere else. And the tax revenue that should have funded community programs simply never appeared. Queens transformed from the site of one of the nation's biggest economic development projects into a cautionary tale about what happens when politicians prioritize performance over actual results. In the gallery, a man in his 30s stood up, wearing a union jacket with Local 3 IBEBU emblazoned on the back. He had the build of a man who works with his hands, broad shoulders, straight posture, working class through and through. Shapiro gestured in his direction. "Sir, would you like to speak?" The man stepped forward, and when he began to speak, his voice carried a thick Queens accent. It was the real deal, not the version AOC sometimes put on for authenticity. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm a union electrician with Local 3. I've lived in the Bronx and Queens my entire life. I am exactly the kind of working-class person Representative Ocasio-Cortez claims to represent." He pulled some papers from his jacket pocket and carefully unfolded them. "These are my applications for the Amazon HQ2 construction project. I applied to work on the electrical systems. That project would have employed hundreds of union electricians just like me for years. It meant good pay, union benefits, and steady work right here, close to home. It would have been life-changing for me and for my neighbors." Marcus's voice grew harder, with anger starting to bleed through his working-class dignity. Then Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez killed it. She celebrated killing it on Twitter while I lost the chance to work in my own neighborhood. All while thousands of other union workers lost their opportunities, And while our community lost out on billions in investment and tens of thousands of jobs, he held up the applications, which were now just useless pieces of paper. I have 2 kids. My daughter just started college. That Amazon job would have meant better pay and benefits, giving me the ability to help her avoid crushing student debt. Instead, I'm now working in Jersey City, a 2-hour commute each way, meaning 4 hours a day on trains and buses, all because there's no good work left in my own district. Marcus pointed directly at AOC, his voice rising with the fury of someone who felt betrayed by the very person claiming to represent him. You didn't kill Amazon for us. You didn't do it to protect working people. You killed it for your image, for your squad clout, for progressive street cred. You did it for Twitter likes and Instagram followers. You destroyed the economic futures of 25,000 families just so you could feel revolutionary. He then crumpled the applications in his fist. I'm working class. The real working class, not the Instagram version. And you failed us. You made our lives harder just so yours could get easier. You sacrificed our opportunities for your own celebrity. Marcus sat down heavily, and the entire gallery, even the remaining progressive side, sat in a stunned silence. This wasn't some Republican attacking AOC. This wasn't a conservative commentator. This was a union electrician from Queens, the exact demographic she claimed to champion, telling her to her face that she had betrayed him. Shapiro let that testimony hang in the air for a moment before he continued. Marcus Thompson represents the real cost of Representative Ocasio-Cortez's performance activism. Real jobs lost, real families damaged, real economic opportunity destroyed, all so she could have a viral moment standing up to a major corporation. He then pulled out more documents, his voice taking on a tone of what sounded like sheer disbelief. But it gets worse, because Representative Ocasio-Cortez didn't just kill jobs in her own district. She actually got rich from the very policy that created zero jobs. Let me introduce you to the Green New Deal, a piece of legislation that has accomplished precisely nothing except for enriching Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Shapiro began flipping through the pages rapidly. The Green New Deal, introduced in February 2019, promised millions of green jobs, a complete economic transformation, climate salvation, basically the most ambitious environmental legislation in American history. That's how she sold it. That's how she marketed it to her constituents and to the rest of America. He looked up from the papers, his voice practically dripping with disdain. Jobs created in her district by the Green New Deal? Zero. Legislation passed? Zero. Climate impact? Zero. But here's what did happen. Representative Ocasio-Cortez wrote a book about the Green New Deal, a $400,000 advance. She did a speaking tour at $50,000 per appearance and became the face of climate activism, generating millions in personal income. Shapiro stacked the documents, each page serving as another example of profiting from failure. The Green New Deal enriched exactly one person, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It created just one job, hers, as a celebrity progressive commentator making millions from policies that never actually happen. She got rich off climate activism, while the people she represents got absolutely nothing. That's the real Green New Deal. Enrich Alexandria and impoverish everyone else. He paused, adjusted his glasses, and transitioned to his final section with surgical precision. So, we've already established that Representative Ocasio-Cortez uses campaign finance violations and progressive grifting to get rich. We've established that she destroys economic opportunities for the very working-class people she claims to speak for. Now, Let's talk about how she completely abandoned those same constituents to build her celebrity brand. AOC just sat at the witness table, her face pale and her hands trembling, unable to defend herself against a single word. That's because every fact Shapiro laid out was documented, verifiable, and completely undeniable. It was all there in her own words, her own decisions, her own track record of corruption, destruction, and abandonment. And he was just getting started. Shapiro's voice changed again, taking on a cold fury that was somehow even more devastating than if he had been yelling. Let's talk about constituent services. You know, the boring part of being a representative. Answering phone calls, helping with federal agencies, and solving problems for the people who actually elected you. The kind of work that doesn't make for good Instagram content, but actually helps people. He pulled out a congressional report, public data that anyone can look up. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's office has the single worst constituent response rate in all of Congress, not just one of the worst. The worst, period. Her average response time to constituent inquiries is 6 weeks. The national average for Congress is 3 days, 6 weeks versus 3 days. Shapiro let that sink in for a moment. Why? Why does it take her office 6 weeks to respond when most other offices can do it in just 3 days? It's because responding to constituents doesn't help build her brand. It doesn't create viral clips. It doesn't make her famous, so she simply doesn't do it. Then he pulled out letters, emails, and voicemails. Physical proof of people trying to reach AOC's office, not to read them all, because that would be boring, but to show the actual stack of ignored pleas for help. This stack represents hundreds of people who needed help with things like Medicare, Social Security, VA benefits, or immigration paperwork. The basic services that a congressional office is supposed to provide. Shapiro then held up one specific letter. Elena Ruiz, a 73-year-old woman, was struggling to figure out her Medicare enrollment. She called Representative Ocasio-Cortez's office 12 times over a period of 3 months. 12 times. She never once got a call back. Finally, out of sheer desperation, she called a Republican congressman's office, not even her own representative, and they helped her in 1 week. 1 week to solve a problem that AOC's office completely ignored for 3 months. He picked up another letter. This was from David Kim, a small business owner who needed help with an SBA loan application during the COVID pandemic. He called 9 times over 2 months and got only one response, an automated, generic, and totally useless form letter. His business ended up closing down. He's now working the night shift at a warehouse, just trying to pay off the debts from a business that might have been saved if his own congresswoman had only answered his calls. Shapiro placed the letters down on the growing pile of evidence, building a monument to her neglect. So why couldn't Representative Ocasio-Cortez's office help these people? What could they possibly have been too busy with to respond? Well, let me show you what they were busy with. He pulled out yet another type of documentation. This time, it was AOC's public schedule, her media appearances, her celebrity engagements. During the exact same time, Elena Ruiz was calling her office 12 times. Representative Ocasio-Cortez was busy filming a Netflix documentary, doing a photo shoot for Vogue magazine, attending Fashion Week, recording podcast episodes, going on a book tour, attending the Met Gala, and making about 47 different Instagram posts about various progressive causes. His delivery sped up, like machine gun fire. She had time for Netflix, but no time for Elena. She had time for Vogue, but no time for David. She had time for Fashion Week, but no time for her own constituents. She had time to attend a $35,000 a ticket gala, but couldn't find the time to answer phone calls from elderly people who just needed help with Medicare. A middle-aged man, maybe in his 50s and of Puerto Rican descent, stood up in the gallery, wearing a simple button-down shirt that was so well worn the collar was starting to fray. He held himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had built something with his own two hands, only to watch it all fall apart. "Sir," Shapiro paused, giving the man the floor. "My name is Carlos Rodriguez," the man said, his accent thick and his voice heavy with loss. "My family, we owned a restaurant in the Bronx, Rodriguez Family Restaurant, traditional Puerto Rican food. My grandfather opened it back in 1981. It was a family business for 42 years, spanning 3 generations of work." He pulled some worn photographs from his pocket, pictures of the restaurant in its prime, just full of customers, vibrant and alive. "Co-destroyed us. We closed down during the lockdowns. We supported them and understood they were necessary, but we really needed help. The PPP loans, the EIDL programs, all these acronyms and forms and requirements, we just didn't understand them. We're good at cooking food and serving families, not navigating government bureaucracy." Carlos's voice wavered, but it held steady. "I called Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's office. She represents us. I thought she would help us. She's Puerto Rican, just like us. She talks about supporting small businesses and working families. I called 8 times over a period of 4 months. I left messages explaining our situation, asking for some kind of help. We needed to understand the relief programs. We were begging for someone to just call us back." He held up the photographs, and the cameras captured the stark contrast. Images of a thriving family business that were now just memories. No one ever called back, not once. But I saw Representative Ocasio-Cortez on television, at celebrity events, at fashion shows, giving speeches about supporting working people and small businesses. She had time for that. But no time for us. Carlos's voice then broke. "We lost the restaurant. 42 years. My grandfather's dream. My father's life's work. What I was supposed to pass on to my children was gone. All because we couldn't navigate the relief programs alone, and our Congresswoman was too busy being famous to help us." He looked at AOC as tears ran down his face, completely unashamed. "My father died just 6 months after we closed. A heart attack is what the doctor said, but I know what really killed him. It was watching his life's work disappear while the very person who promised to represent us was too busy taking selfies with celebrities." The photographs slipped from Carlos's hands, fluttering to the floor between the witness table and the gallery. They were images of a family restaurant, a community gathering place, a Puerto Rican success story. Now just closed memories because a congresswoman couldn't be bothered to return a few phone calls. Shapiro didn't pick up the photographs. He let them lie there as evidence, as an accusation, as the human cost of celebrity over service. He then gave Carlos Rodriguez's testimony the silence it deserved before continuing. Carlos Rodriguez represents hundreds of small business owners in Representative Ocasio-Cortez's district who lost everything during CO, not because help wasn't available, but because they couldn't navigate the complex federal programs by themselves, and their congresswoman's office wouldn't help them. She was too busy building her brand to actually do her job. He pulled out crime statistics, but immediately pivoted to telling stories rather than just listing numbers. Let's discuss safety. Representative Ocasio-Cortez supported the Defund the Police movement proudly, vocally, and repeatedly. Shapiro showed her tweets, her speeches, and her media appearances advocating for reducing police funding. And here's what happened in her district after police funding was cut, and officers began leaving the force in record numbers. Mrs. Chen's corner store, which has been there for 30 years, was robbed 3 times in just 6 months. The police response time used to be 8 minutes. Now it's 45 minutes. She's thinking about closing for good, which would leave the community without one of its few remaining small businesses. And here's another story. The subway station at Jackson Heights. It saw 4 violent assaults in just 3 months. Constituents became afraid to even commute. They wanted more police presence. Representative Ocasio-Cortez suggested more social workers instead. They needed safety. She gave them a theory. Shapiro's voice now carried a genuine anger that was controlled, but unmistakable. While crime increased in her district, while her constituents felt unsafe in their own neighborhoods, Representative Ocasio-Cortez was on progressive podcasts discussing abolishing prisons and reimagining public safety. Her constituents needed protection. She just gave them performance activism. He gathered his documents, preparing for his closing argument. So, let's summarize Representative Ocasio-Cortez's record. She puts her boyfriend on the campaign payroll for $6 million while volunteers are working for free. She kills 25,000 union jobs just for Instagram clout. She gets rich from climate activism while creating 0 green jobs. She ignores her constituents' calls while attending celebrity events. She lets small businesses completely collapse while she's filming Netflix documentaries. She allows crime to increase while advocating for defunding the police. Shapiro stood, and his voice carried an absolute certainty. Representative Ocasio-Cortez attacked me at the beginning of this hearing, calling me a fascist, a propagandist, and dangerous to democracy, but I'm just a commentator. I give opinions that people can choose to consume or simply ignore. She is a congresswoman. She holds real power over real people's lives, and she has abused it to get rich while wrecking the lives of the working-class folks she says she represents. He stared right at AOC one last time. So, between us, Representative, who's the real danger here? That question just hung there in the air, unanswerable, devastating, and final. Shapiro stayed on his feet, collected his papers with sharp, precise moves, and launched into his closing with that rapid-fire delivery he was famous for. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you kicked off this hearing with an attack on me. You labeled me a fascist propagandist who enables Trump's authoritarianism. You went after my character, my integrity, and even my connection to my Jewish faith. You implied that I make money by spreading hate and weakening our democracy. He laid his hand flat on the pile of evidence he had just presented. I haven't responded with insults, but with your own record. Not with my opinions, but with cold, hard facts. And not with feelings, but with documented proof. His pace quickened, each point landing like a hammer blow. $6 million to your boyfriend for consulting work that was never defined and produced nothing. 25,000 union jobs gone, just so you could look like a revolutionary for fighting Amazon. Millions made from Green New Deal book deals and speaking gigs, all while the policy itself created not a single job. The worst response rate to constituents in all of Congress, because you're too busy playing celebrity to pick up the phone. Small businesses are failing while you're off filming Netflix documentaries. Crime is on the rise while you're pushing to defund the police. Shapiro paused, letting the weight of the evidence sink in before delivering his final judgment. You're not a socialist, Representative. Socialists believe in collective ownership and sharing resources. You believe in making yourself rich while hiding behind progressive-sounding words. You aren't even a progressive. Progressives believe in using the government's power to make people's lives better. You just use the government's power to build up your personal brand. His voice dropped, turning colder. You're a narcissist who stumbled upon a profitable gimmick. You figured out you could sell performance activism, that you could get rich by pretending to fight for the working class while you were actually just using them. You are everything. You claim to be against corruption, getting rich off your position, and abandoning the people who elected you. You just happen to have better Instagram captions. Shapiro started to pack up his things, getting ready to sit, but he had one last thing to say. You called me a danger to democracy, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, but I'm just a commentator sharing my opinions. You're a congresswoman who is abusing her power. You're a celebrity who forgot what her job was. You're a fraud who cashed in on people's hopes to make yourself wealthy. He looked at her one final time, delivering his signature line with perfect timing. Facts don't care about your feelings, Representative, and these facts will be the end of your career. He sat down. There was no look of triumph on his face, no sign of satisfaction, just the calm, collected attitude of someone who had laid out his case, made his point, and knew the evidence would do the rest. AOC sat there, frozen for a second before getting to her feet on shaky legs. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was filled with a desperate need to defend herself. This is a character assassination. It's your record, Shapiro cut in calmly, without even looking at her. She tried again. You're twisting things and taking them out of context. Which fact was out of context? He looked up then, with a look of genuine curiosity. The $6 million that went to your boyfriend? The 25,000 jobs you personally killed? The constituents you ignored? Which specific fact did I get wrong? AOC opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. No words came out. She couldn't name a single fact he'd gotten wrong, because he hadn't. It was all true, all on the record, all based on her own words, her own choices, and their consequences. She tried one last desperate line of defense. This is exactly what I was talking about. Right-wing attacks on strong women of color who... 3 people testified against you today, Shapiro cut her off, his voice carrying an air of absolute finality. Jennifer Martinez, a young woman who volunteered for your campaign. Marcus Thompson, a union worker from Queens. Carlos Rodriguez, a small business owner from Puerto Rico. 2 women and a Latino man from your own district, your own background, your own community. This isn't a right-wing attack, Representative. This is accountability coming from the very people you betrayed. He delivered the final killing blow. Try again. AOC sank into her chair, defeated. No defense had landed. Every attack had been blocked. Every excuse had been taken apart. She was exposed, wrecked, and finished. Not by political attacks, but by her own record, laid out for the whole world to see. Chairman Comer, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, brought the hearing to an end. This hearing is adjourned. The gallery cleared out in a hurry. The few progressive supporters who remained simply fled, unable to defend what they'd just witnessed and unwilling to be associated with AOC's total collapse. Conservative media outlets rushed out of the room to file their stories. Cameras captured AOC sitting all alone at the witness table, emotionally frozen, unable to even process what had just happened. Her phone, sitting on the table, began to buzz once, twice, and then just kept going. A relentless vibration of non-stop notifications. She glanced at the screen and immediately had to look away, unable to face what she was seeing. Twitter was absolutely exploding. Facts don't care was trending worldwide. The video of Shapiro's systematic dismantling of her argument had already been clipped, edited, uploaded, and was going mega viral. Within an hour, it would have 10 million views. By the end of the day, 50 million. The clip of AOC trying to claim character assassination and Shapiro calmly responding, "It's your record," would go on to become one of the most shared political moments of the year. Even her allies in the media couldn't defend her. MSNBC's Chiron read, "Representative Ocasio-Cortez faces tough questioning on record." CNN played the exchange on a constant loop, with commentary about the questions of accountability now facing progressive representatives. The entire narrative had flipped so completely and so quickly that even her usual defenders were scrambling to distance themselves from her. By that evening, members of the squad were issuing carefully worded statements, not supporting her, not condemning her, just offering vague platitudes about how everyone is accountable for their record and the importance of constituent services. The message was crystal clear. She was on her own. By the next morning, Democratic Party leadership was having quiet conversations about potential ethics investigations, about campaign finance violations, and about whether AOC had become more of a liability than an asset. By the end of the week, a primary challenger had already emerged. Maria Santos, a community organizer who'd lived in the Bronx her entire life, announced she was running with a simple message. Your representative should answer your calls and help you, not build a celebrity brand while you suffer. Early polling showed Santos leading by a staggering 18 points. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had attacked Ben Shapiro, thinking she would humiliate him, destroy him, and show the world who held the real power. Instead, she had handed him a platform to systematically dismantle her entire career using nothing but the facts, the evidence, and her own words. She had tried to fight logic with emotion, tried to counter facts with feelings, and tried to defend corruption with accusations of partisanship. And she had learned the hard way what millions of people already knew. Facts don't care about your feelings. Fast forward to January 2026. The Democratic primary in New York's 14th district was still months away, but the outcome already felt inevitable. Maria Santos was leading Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in every single poll, usually by double digits. The squad's most famous member was heading toward a humiliating defeat, and everyone knew it. AOC still maintained her social media presence, still posted about progressive causes, and still tried to project the image of a congresswoman fighting for the people. But the engagement numbers told a different story. Followers were declining, likes were decreasing, and the comment sections were filled with endless variations of, "Remember when Shapiro destroyed you?" The speaking invitations had dried up. The media appearances became less and less frequent. The celebrity friends stopped calling. The progressive organizations that had once celebrated her now kept their distance, recognizing that AOC had simply become too toxic to associate with. She'd tried to mount a defense in the weeks after the hearing. She claimed she was being targeted for being a strong woman of color. She insisted that Shapiro had taken things out of context. She argued that the attacks were politically motivated. But none of it worked, because Shapiro hadn't attacked her. He'd simply presented her record, and that record was indefensible. Ben Shapiro, for his part, returned to his regular work. The Daily Wire, his podcast, his commentary, it was business as usual. The clip of him destroying AOC became one of the most watched political videos of the year. It was used in countless compilations and referenced endlessly, his "Facts don't care about your feelings" line renewed as a meme and a cultural touchstone. When asked about it in interviews, Shapiro was characteristically direct. Representative Ocasio-Cortez attacked me personally. I responded with her record. That's not an attack. That's accountability. She enriched herself while claiming to fight for working people. She killed jobs while pretending to create them. She ignored her constituents while building a celebrity brand. Those are facts. And facts, as I always say, don't care about her feelings when it comes to being exposed. Jennifer Martinez, the campaign volunteer who had testified, was now on Maria Santos's campaign team. She told reporters, "This time I'm working for someone who genuinely wants to help people, not just get famous." Maria actually answers her phone. She shows up to community meetings. She puts in the work. That's what real representation should be. Marcus Thompson, the union electrician, landed a construction job nearer to his home, not in Queens, since Amazon wasn't coming back, but it was close enough to cut his commute from 4 hours down to just 90 minutes. "I still wish I had that Amazon job," he mentioned to a local newspaper, still frustrated with Ocasio-Cortez for killing the deal. "But at least now we might get a representative who's actually here for us, instead of just using our lives for Instagram content." Carlos Rodriguez had finally given up on the idea of reopening his restaurant. His dream of passing down his grandfather's legacy to his own children had died right along with the business. Instead, he started a food truck. It was smaller and more manageable, no longer the community hub his family had built over 42 years. But it was something. "I'm still serving the same recipes my grandfather created," he said in a quiet voice. "People tell me they miss the restaurant. I just tell them to remember that when it's time to vote. Remember who was there for them and who left them behind." The lesson was crystal clear, written right there in the ruins of a political career that seemed unstoppable only months earlier. Performance activism will eventually face accountability. Celebrity status, sooner or later, has consequences. And when someone who has built their entire brand on fighting corruption is exposed as being corrupt themselves, the fall from grace is both swift and final. Alexandria. Ocasio-Cortez had wanted her legacy to be that of a revolutionary, a voice for the voiceless, a true champion for the working class. Instead, she would be remembered as the congresswoman who took on Ben Shapiro only to be taken down by her own track record. The one who got rich while preaching socialism, killed jobs while building her personal brand, and ignored her own constituents to become a celebrity. She'd be remembered as the politician who tried to battle facts with feelings, only to learn that in the end, facts always come out on top. Ultimately, Ben Shapiro had simply reminded America of a lesson it already knew, but one it sometimes forgets. You stay calm. You present the evidence. You let the facts do the talking. You don't get emotional when the attacks get personal. You just respond with their own record. Logic will always beat hysteria. Facts will always beat feelings. And calm will always destroy chaos. And sometimes, the best revenge you can get on someone who attacks you is to just tell the truth about who they are. Alexandria. Ocasio-Cortez threw the first punch. Ben Shapiro simply responded with facts. She lost the fight. He won because, in the end, it's inevitable. Facts just don't care about your feelings. And no amount of progressive talk, no number of social media followers, and no level of celebrity status can save you when someone calmly, precisely, and systematically lays out the truth of who you are and what you've actually done. The squad's most famous member learned that lesson in the most public and humiliating way you could imagine. And all of America watched, remembered, and understood. The truth matters. Facts matter. A person's record matters. Performance is just temporary. Reality is permanent. And eventually, the receipts always come due.